Hello, welcome to this video. Today I want to answer a question that I got asked recently about my experience spending most of my 20s living in the woods. I spent about 8 years, maybe a little bit more, in some interesting form of living in the woods, building cabins with friends. I get asked sometimes by people who read writing that I did about that about 10 years ago, or people who read my latest book where I address that phase of my life in a somewhat understated way. I get people asking, what happened there? Why did you go live in the woods and why did you leave? And just to clarify before I answer those questions, for me, when I say living in the woods, what that meant for me personally, in my experience, was living in a series of cabins that I built with friends in the backwoods of Vancouver Island, where we didn't have running water, we didn't have electricity, and we planted our little gardens, we learned how to forage and hunt, and then we would come into town and scavenge and scrounge, and it was this kind of hybrid lifestyle of playing around with really primitive back to the land living, as well as kind of scavenging and scrounging from the modern world that was on our periphery. And it was a really fun, beautiful, and interesting and unusual chapter of my life that went on for a pretty long, significant part of my life. And yeah, in this video, I just want to talk about why I chose to do that, and why I chose to leave that and move on to my present lifestyle, which at this moment involves living in downtown Vancouver, one of the largest cities in Canada, and really loving it and being very grateful for where I am now, which is extremely different from where I was 10, 15 years ago. So the reason why I went and lived in the woods is something that I feel like becomes more clear to me the longer I am out of it, the more I have the space to reflect on all of my decisions throughout life and where they came from. But at this moment, I feel like the reason why I went and lived in the woods was rooted in like two polar forces inside of me. On one hand, there was like this intense emotional discomfort and pain that I was going to nature to soothe and to find refuge from the complexity of the world and the challenges of being around people. I feel like that was probably like most of the reason that I went and lived in the woods, was basically a form of emotional self-medication, because I was very sensitive, and I just didn't know how to be in this cruel world. And I don't feel that this world is necessarily cruel from my vantage point right now, but in my youth, the world and humanity and my place in it all felt so terrifying and difficult and mean and ugly. And I know now that that had more to do with what was going on inside of me than the world and humanity itself. It had more to do with how I felt in my family than how I felt in the family of humanity. And on the other side, my drive to live in the woods, it seems, upon reflection, like just as much as it was this running and hiding from the terrifying world and finding a sanctuary in nature, it was this desire for something pure, this desire for a connection to the sacred, to the divine, that I felt in nature. As a teenager, I would go for walks alone in the woods, and I felt some peace, calm, and at times like ecstatic connection to something greater than myself. I felt a naturalness and a beauty and things that I didn't have the ability to experience in community, in human relationships. I could I could go there in nature by myself. If I were to, honestly say why I went and lived in the woods alone for a big portion of that time, and then with like-minded friends for almost an equal amount of time, it would be because I was really emotionally sensitive and distraught, and I had a tender, sensitive, broken heart that didn't want to be in this fucking world. And so it was like, fuck it, I'm out. I'm going to the woods, I'm going to nature, and I'm gonna do that. And when I was in my mid-20s, by the time I had, spent my adult life living this kind of like, kind of hybrid backwoods lifestyle, I met a very influential mentor, friend, teacher, who I talk about in my book. I tell this story in greater detail and context in my book, How to Open the Heart. But I met someone who basically challenged my impulse to run from the world. My first experience of really spending time alone in nature is when I was 17, turning 18. I spent my 18th birthday alone in the woods on a relatively unpopulated island, and I had a lot of solitude at a time in my life where I had no experience with solitude, and it did something to me. Something in my psyche broke. I was alone with all of my negativity and my fear and my self-loathing, and just to be so nakedly trapped with those feelings, because I was on an island, I couldn't leave. I could have, but it would have been a big scene, and my masculinity wouldn't allow me to show such weakness and vulnerability at that age. So I trapped myself alone as a teenager with all of my feelings, and I just had to thrash in that anxiety with no great ability to escape, no smartphone, which I'm recording this on. And after a couple weeks of that, I broke through. Something in my psyche. It just broke. I don't know how to explain it other than that, but one day that anxiety just like snapped, and on the other side of it was this sense of peace and calm and ecstatic silence, this ecstatic internal silence, this reverence for life. And it was so profound and so moving. And upon reflection, this is almost 20 years ago now, the most interesting part of that experience was at the end of that summer, which I spent largely alone, in a great deal of solitude on this island. The most interesting part was coming back to town, coming back to my hometown, coming back to my family, and seeing how my open heart, this extraordinary ecstatic state, this transcendent experience that I had, seeing how quickly that shut down around my family, who they didn't have that experience. So when I came back and I was in this, I was seeing things differently, they weren't. And so what little of that I shared with them was just met with closed hearts. They weren't, I had some opening and they hadn't. and they didn't understand the language I was speaking when I came back. Nobody did. And I found that I quickly just shut down around everybody. I just shut down. Whatever glowing, ebullient thing I had felt, the only place I really knew how to keep that open was alone in the woods. And so I attached to that. And then in certain friendships, you know, really inspired friendships or a passionate love relationship, there were places where I could experience that more, but the easiest was to go to nature. And so I continued to do that. And in my mid-20s, coming back to where I started this tangent, in my mid-20s, many years into my experience of living in the woods, I met a man who strongly, fiercely challenged my tendency to run and hide in the safety of nature, to open my heart when I was in the calm, gentle waters of solitude in the woods, and then to close it off in relationship to the world of humanity, and to shut it off in relation to other people. He challenged me, and I took the challenge. I accepted the challenge. The challenge was, Miles, you're really good at opening your heart in like 2 tiny little fractions of your experience as a human. And everywhere else, you're really good at closing your heart. You have this ability to open your heart that's profound, but when you come into the world, or even just the way that you look at the world, you let yourself close off. And that's not a mature way of relating to life. It's not a mature way of relating to others, and it's your own emotional development is stunted as a result of you running and hiding from the challenge that being in relationship and being in the world presents. So another way of saying that is, by the time I was getting on in my 20s, that kind of the light or the luminescent experiences that I had that had drawn me to living in the woods, they really had diminished a lot, and I had developed a very negative, misanthropic view of life. And while I always experienced something beautiful through connecting to nature, the way I felt about the world and about myself and about others was not very healthy. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel, I don't know, it was like there was this, something was off. There was some anger, depression, rage, hatred. There was like a violence in me. There was I would say conflict, but it feels truer to say there was a violence in me that had grown over those years living in the woods. It felt like that was what drew me to the woods, this conflict that saw possible healing or resolution by connection to nature. But that violence had grown. That conflict had grown. And I wouldn't say it's because I made the wrong choice or anything. It's just that it came to a point where it was very evident that there was something in me that wanted something else. It had like this burning yearning for a new chapter, for something more. And when my friend and mentor came into my life and presented that challenge of, why don't you learn how to hold what you've experienced alone in nature, take that expanded natural sense of self that you've experienced in those peak states, what would it be like? How hard would it be for you to take that and be around your loved ones? How hard would it be for you to take that and hold that in the world with all of these people and their judgments, with all of these people and their contrasting perspectives and ways of relating? How can you hold that in this space? And what a profound challenge could that be for you? What could you bring to the world if you were strong enough to carry that light with you into this shit show? That's the reason I left the woods. And partially because I was there was a spiritual dissatisfaction with being outside of the river of humanity. And this is something I'm very loath to make generalizations based on my own experience, but I know that for me, when I went to live in the woods, if I saw a young person going to do that, there would be some like warning bells going off. It would be like, oh, for a young man, I was 17, the first time I went to spend an extended period alone in nature. For a young man to choose to extract himself from human relationships, from potential, you gotta, to me, at this point, I understand, how fucking good human connection is, and how... Now, I'm a lifelong, introvert and loner to some extent, so I thrive on alone time. I have since those first experiences alone in nature. Having said that, though, human connection is so profoundly good that when someone chooses to extract themselves from it in an extreme way, I feel like there's usually probably something up there. There's an emotional warning bell. Somebody, in my case, I had to be quite hurt in order to do something so extreme, because all I ever wanted was to feel love, to feel support, to exchange that with others. Now, going and being alone in nature provided this profound learning about love and self-love, and that's kind of another subject, but for someone to have that desire to extract themselves from the community of humanity, from the richness, the profound richness of participating in humanity, in that giving and receiving, that's pretty extreme. And it's often accompanied by some real hurt, some hurt feelings. And I'm so grateful that as an emotionally tormented young man, I chose to self-medicate myself by going into nature instead of using hard drugs, instead of ... It's not the most destructive coping mechanism. But upon reflection, I feel like, it was a beautiful part of my life. I don't regret it at all. I see the emotional reasons behind why I did something so extreme, and something that was kind of emotionally masochistic, in the sense that it was denying a deep part of me what it wanted most, which would be human relationship and love. And I totally appreciate, on this side of that experience, how extracting myself from humanity, from my culture, from so many things, gave me space to feel my own authentic feelings and feel myself in profound ways over a very long period of time. And it probably had some, it's hard to quantify what effect that had on me emotionally and psychologically. For the better, I think, because I got to spend a lot of time close to nature, and it's pretty fucking awesome what that does to you. And there was also a lot of negativity and confusion and self-righteousness and directionlessness. So there was many sides to it, and I'm really grateful that I dove into that experience, and I'm really grateful that it ended when it did, because a door to a really beautiful and meaningful exploration of the underlying reasons for my choice opened up when I left the forest. I spent the following almost decade now diving headfirst into the why, into the pain, into the feelings that had compelled me to step away, and learning how to be that more expanded, honest, authentic, natural person in this world, which is one of the most beautiful and profound and difficult things. And it's a life's work. And I'm really, really grateful to be doing that work now in the modern world. I know that was a tangential answer to the question of, Miles, why did you go live in the woods? But okay, if I were try to put it into a synopsis, I would say I went to live in the woods because I was hurting emotionally tremendously, and I had no fucking idea how to feel my feelings in this world. So I just wanted to be around the trees and the silence, and I fucking hated everything else. But after a while, I realized, oh my God, I need everything else. I need to bridge these two worlds. I need to bridge my sensitivity and this feeling of openness and naturalness and love with this incredibly intimidating, terrifying realm of humanity and relationships, and not just run from it, not just hide in the safety of the forest for the rest of my life. So leaving the forest was actually facing a new challenge, and a more difficult challenge, and a more beautiful and profound and magical challenge than the physical difficulty of living in the woods entailed. That's my answer. That's my answer to that question. And if you're curious about that journey, by all means, check out my book, How to Open the Heart. You will find a link to it in the description below this video. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. If you liked this video, be sure to click the subscribe button for more where this came from. I will see you next time, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.